I received flowers on my birthday, 24 garden roses, the kind that cost more than they should, wrapped in this expensive craft paper with a silk ribbon that actually felt nice between your fingers. They were perfect. The color was this soft blush pink, not quite white, not quite coral. The kind of thoughtful detail that suggests someone knows you. There was a card, white envelope, cream-colored card inside, handwritten in this looping script. Happy birthday. You deserve to know. No signature, no name, just that sentence. I stood in my kitchen holding these flowers, and I had this moment where I genuinely didn't know which feeling was going to win, curiosity or dread. Curiosity won first, but dread was waiting in the wings, and it's been living there ever since. My name is Catherine, and this is the story of the day I realized that sometimes the cruelest thing someone can do is give you exactly what you've been avoiding knowing. It's also the story of how I learned that revenge, done right, doesn't look like revenge at all. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to set this up properly, because this isn't a story about a woman scorned in the traditional sense. This isn't about rage and vindication and dramatic confrontation. This is a story about power dynamics and information as a weapon, and what happens when you realize that the person you married has been systematically lying to you for years. Let me go back. James and I got married 11 years ago, which sounds like a long time until you realize that it's also just a blink. 11 years is long enough to build something real, but it's also long enough to build something that looks real while being completely hollow underneath. We met at a work conference. He was in finance, I was in marketing. It was very meeting someone at a networking event in a hotel ballroom. Energy, which is to say, it was convenient more than it was romantic, but we both needed something at the time, and we found it in each other. He was stable, I was ambitious. We balanced each other out in that way that feels good on paper. We bought a house, we took vacations. We had the kind of marriage that looked perfect from the outside and felt increasingly quiet from the inside. Here's the thing nobody tells you about long-term relationships. Quiet isn't always peaceful. Sometimes quiet is just the sound of two people running out of things to say to each other. By year 8, we developed this rhythm. He'd come home from work around 6:30. I'd have dinner ready, or we'd order something, we'd eat, we'd watch TV, we'd go to bed. On weekends, we'd do couple things, brunch with his friends, or we'd go to a movie. We looked fine. We probably seemed fine to people who knew us, but I remember the exact moment I realized something was wrong. It was a Tuesday night, nothing special. We were watching something on Netflix, and his phone buzzed. He picked it up, which he usually didn't do during our together time. He looked at the screen, and his whole body changed, just slightly. A tension in his jaw, a shift in his breathing. Then he got up and said he had to check something in his office. He was gone for 45 minutes. I didn't follow him. I didn't check his phone. I did something worse. I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was looking for problems where there weren't any, that the reason he was acting weird was probably work stress or something with his family. That's the thing about ignoring red flags in a marriage. You don't actually make them go away. You just paint them the same color as the walls and pretend they're not there. Over the next year, the small things accumulated. He was suddenly careful about his phone in a way he'd never been before. He'd work late, but when I'd ask about it, he'd get irritated, like the question itself was an accusation. He stopped trying to have conversations with me that weren't logistical. He stopped asking about my day in that way that suggests you actually want to know the answer. And I adjusted. That's what you do. You adjust your expectations down so you don't have to confront the fact that something fundamental has shifted. I never said, I think you're having an affair. I never asked directly, because asking directly would mean I'd have to deal with the answer, and I wasn't ready to deal with the answer. So I just kept adjusting. My birthday is in March. It's always been kind of a big deal in my family, not in an obnoxious way, but in that way where everyone acknowledges it and makes you feel seen. My mom usually calls first thing in the morning. My best friend Rachel always takes me to dinner. James always does something thoughtful, though in recent years, the thoughtfulness had become more obligation than inspiration. Last March was different because I'd actually asked him not to make a big deal. I was turning 40, and I was in that weird mental space where aging felt less like a celebration and more like evidence of time passing while I wasn't paying attention. I told him, no big party, no fuss, maybe just dinner somewhere nice. He said, of course, whatever you want, which should have been fine, should have been exactly what I asked for. The morning of my birthday, my mom called. Rachel texted a photo of the restaurant she'd booked. I got emails from people I work with. My sister sent me a funny card. It was a normal birthday. James gave me a gift at breakfast, a watch I actually liked, which was surprising because he'd gotten me a lot of gifts in recent years that seemed like they were picked out by someone who'd never met me. This watch suggested he'd paid attention at some point. He kissed my forehead and said, "Happy birthday." And I remember thinking that his tone suggested he meant it, that maybe I'd been wrong about all the small disconnections, that maybe we were actually okay. Then around 2 p.m., the flowers arrived. I was alone in the house. James was at work. The delivery person handed me this massive box, and I just assumed it was from him. Some grand gesture to make up for the fact that he'd been distant. Some way of saying, I know I've been weird lately. But when I opened the card, it said what I already told you. Happy birthday. You deserve to know. I stood there for probably 5 minutes just holding that card, because I already knew. Not consciously, not in the part of my brain that makes decisions, but in the part of my brain that's been sounding an alarm for a year, I already knew. I called James. He didn't answer. I texted, "Who sent me flowers?" He texted back, "What flowers?" So I sent him a photo, and there was this pause, like a digital hesitation. And then he called me. His voice was careful, controlled. Where did they come from? There's no name on the card, just a message. Pause. What does the message say? And here's where I should have told him. Here's where I should have read it out loud and asked directly what was happening. Instead, I lied. I said, "It just says, happy birthday." I assumed it was you. He was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "I didn't send them. Maybe it's from Rachel or someone from work?" "Maybe," I said, but I knew. I'd known the moment I read that card. Someone was telling me something I'd been avoiding knowing. Someone was handing me information wrapped in 24 garden roses. After we hung up, I put the flowers in water. I arranged them in a vase, and then I did something I'd never done before. I called my lawyer, not to file for divorce, not yet, just to have a conversation, to understand what my options were, to know what it would look like if I decided that I was done. My lawyer, David, is someone I'd met years ago at a networking event. He asked me to come in his office the next morning. I told him everything. Not because I wanted to file right away, but because I needed to understand the landscape I was standing in. I needed to know what power I actually had. I didn't confront James about the flowers. That was deliberate. I needed to know what I was dealing with before I played my hand. So I did something that I'm not particularly proud of, but I'm also not apologizing for. I hired a private investigator. Her name was Monica, and she was the kind of woman who'd probably been through something similar herself. She didn't judge. She just asked very specific questions and promised me results. 2 weeks later, I had them. James had been having an affair with his assistant for almost 3 years. 3 years. The relationship had started before they'd even hired her officially. She was young, 28 to his 47. Of course she was. It's so predictable it almost hurts. But here's what was interesting. It wasn't some secret thing he was keeping compartmentalized. People knew. At his office, people knew. There were emails between his colleagues making jokes about it. There were photos of them together at after-work drinks, photos that existed in a cloud somewhere, accessible to anyone who bothered to look. And nobody had told me. Monica also found something else. The flowers came from the Mistress. Her name was Victoria. She'd created an anonymous account just to send me flowers. The investigator had traced the credit card, the florist order, everything. I sat in Monica's office, looking at photographs of my husband with this woman, and I felt this thing that wasn't rage. It was colder than rage. It was clarity. I asked Monica, why would she send me flowers? Why would she do that? Monica said something I've thought about a lot since. Because she wants you to know. Because knowing is worse than not knowing. Because she has power over you. And she wants to make sure you understand that. That's when I understood what was actually happening. This wasn't about James being a cheater. Infidelity is common enough. This was about Victoria establishing dominance. This was about her sending a message. I know you don't know, and I'm going to make sure you do. I'm going to make sure you feel the full weight of being excluded from your own life. And I realized that James had let her do that. He'd participated in a dynamic where his mistress could send his wife flowers on her birthday, and he wouldn't even know about it. That's not passion. That's not love. That's just a man who doesn't care what happens to either of them, as long as he gets to keep his comfortable life. I went home that night, and I made a decision. I was going to destroy them both. Not violently, not publicly, but systematically, elegantly. In a way that wouldn't look like revenge because it wouldn't look like anything at all. I spent the next month gathering information, not in a frantic way, in a very methodical way. I learned everything about Victoria. I found her LinkedIn. I found her Instagram. I found her family's social media. I learned that she had parents who still lived in the Midwest, that she had a sister who just had a baby, that she posted about mental health awareness while sleeping with someone else's husband. I learned about James's finances in a way I'd never bothered to before. I understood exactly where the money was going. I understood his structure, his habits, his vulnerabilities, and I didn't do any of this out of rage. I did it out of something colder and more useful, strategic necessity. Here's what I decided. I wasn't going to leave him immediately. I was going to wait. I was going to document everything. I was going to make sure that when I finally made my move, he'd have no leverage against me whatsoever. I also decided something else. Victoria needed to understand that actions have consequences, not legal consequences, not public consequences, just the understanding that she couldn't send anonymous flowers to someone's wife without that person understanding exactly what had happened. I called a florist, not the same one, a different one. I ordered flowers to be sent to Victoria's office, 24 white roses. On the card, I wrote, "He's not going to leave her. He's going to leave you, and you're going to know exactly when it happens." I know. I know how that sounds. It sounds like I was the crazy wife. But here's the thing. I wasn't being crazy. I was being strategic. I was communicating in the only language she would understand, which was the language of power and information. She called James. The florist later told me, because I'd paid them to track what happened, that she called him in tears, asking who'd sent her flowers and what it meant. James freaked out. He actually freaked out in a way I'd never seen before. He started looking over his shoulder. He started questioning me in ways he hadn't before, trying to figure out if I knew, if I'd found out, if I'd sent them. And I just smiled and acted like I didn't know what he was talking about. But the important thing was this. For the first time, Victoria wasn't in control of the narrative. For the first time, she was the one who didn't know what was happening. That's the thing about power. It shifts really quickly once you understand how it actually works. While James was spiraling about the flowers, I was being very busy with paperwork. I met with David, my lawyer, multiple times. I documented the affair. I documented James's financial situation. I opened a separate bank account and started moving money into it. Legally, gradually, nothing that would trigger alarms. I learned about community property laws. I learned about spousal support and asset division and what I was actually entitled to. I took screenshots of everything. I made copies of bank statements, I photographed documents, I did the work that nobody wants to do because nobody wants to admit they're planning an exit strategy from their own marriage. But here's the thing, having a plan doesn't mean you have to execute it immediately. Having a plan just means you're no longer operating from a place of fear. You're operating from a place of choice. I also hired Monica again. I had her document more. I had her create a timeline. I had her gather evidence in a way that would hold up legally if I needed it to. And I went to work. I had a life outside of this marriage. I had a job, a career, friendships. I didn't let this consume me because consuming myself in this would have been exactly what James wanted. For me to fall apart so he could feel justified in what he'd done. Instead, I was very functional, very present, very normal. I went to his office holiday party. I smiled and shook hands and stood next to him while he introduced me to people who already knew he was having an affair. I watched Victoria across the room, and she watched me. We made eye contact once, and I smiled. Not a nice smile, a knowing smile. She left the party early. James asked me later if anything was wrong. I said I was just tired. He seemed to believe me. 5 months after the flowers, I filed for divorce. I did it quietly. I called James at work and said I needed to talk to him. He came home, and I had David there. He had the paperwork. I explained exactly what was going to happen. James went pale. He started trying to negotiate. He started making promises. He started asking me what he'd done. As if he didn't already know, I said, I know about Victoria. I know about the affair. I know how long it's been going on. I know about the money you've been spending. I have documentation of all of it. And then I said, the thing that actually made him understand the severity. I also know that you're about to lose everything. Your marriage, your reputation at work, your financial stability, and you're going to lose all of it because you made a choice to hurt someone who had done nothing but support you. I didn't yell. I wasn't even particularly angry in that moment. I was just stating facts. The divorce took 14 months. It was expensive and painful, and there were moments where I doubted myself. But because I'd done the work, because I documented everything, because I understood the landscape, I got exactly what I was entitled to. Half of our assets, spousal support for a set period, the house. And James got to start over from nothing, rebuilding a life that Victoria wasn't going to wait around for, because he had nothing left to offer her. Here's what happened to them. Victoria tried to stay for about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, but James didn't have the financial resources to support her in the way he had before. The secret affair was over. Now it was just a relationship, and relationships are harder than affairs. Relationships require actual vulnerability and honesty. Victoria left him for someone else about 8 months after the divorce was finalized. I know this because, yes, I kept tabs for a while, not in an obsessive way, just in a way that allowed me to confirm that actions had consequences. The last I heard, she was working in HR at a different company, and James was renting an apartment in a less nice part of town and dating someone who was approximately his age and actually available. But here's the important part. I'm not telling you this story because I got revenge. I'm telling you this story because I got something that looked a lot more like justice. When I look back on this entire situation, the thing that matters most to me isn't that I destroyed my husband's affair or that his mistress got her comeuppance. That stuff feels small now. What matters is this. I reclaimed my own agency. For so long, I'd been operating as if other people's choices were things that happened to me. As if James's infidelity and Victoria's flowers and all of it was something I had to suffer through and accept. But what I learned is that you always have agency. You always have options. You always have power. The mistake people make when they find out about infidelity is they usually do one of two things. They either blow up immediately, which gives all the power to the person who lied, or they suffer silently, which also gives all the power to the person who lied. What I did was the third thing. I took control of the timeline. I gathered information. I made strategic decisions. I understood that revenge, that looks like revenge, is actually just another form of being controlled by the person who hurt you. Real power looks like knowing exactly what you're going to do and doing it quietly and strategically and without needing anyone to validate that it was the right choice. Victoria sent me those flowers thinking she was establishing dominance. And in a weird way, she was the catalyst for me understanding that I had been giving away my power for years, not just in the marriage, but in my entire life. After the divorce, I didn't go through some dramatic transformation. I didn't dye my hair or move to another country or date a bunch of inappropriate people. I just got quieter about my actual life. I made decisions based on what I wanted instead of what I thought I should want. I built friendships that were about mutual respect instead of habit. I learned to say no without apologizing. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I forgave James. I didn't. I'm not going to tell you I've made peace with Victoria. I haven't. But I did something more useful than either of those things. I moved on, and I learned that the most elegant revenge, the kind that actually works, isn't revenge at all. It's just you living your life, making deliberate choices, understanding your own value, and refusing to be diminished by someone else's cruelty. The flowers that started this whole thing, I kept them until they died. and then I threw them away. But I kept the lesson. Here's what I want you to understand if you're in a situation like this. If you found out that someone you trusted has been deceiving you, if someone is actively trying to establish power over you or make you feel small, first, your instinct to react immediately is probably wrong. I know that's not what people want to hear. People want to hear that you should confront them and have a big dramatic scene. But drama is what people who are scared want you to do. Drama makes you emotional and reactive and easy to dismiss. What actually works is information, understanding, strategic patience. Second, you don't have to make your move immediately. You can take time. You can gather information. You can make a plan. And while you're doing that, you can seem completely normal. You can seem fine. You can protect yourself emotionally while you're organizing yourself practically. Third, real power doesn't announce itself. Real power is quiet and methodical and requires you to understand that sometimes the most important thing you can do is let someone think they're winning while you're actually preparing to take the entire board off the table. Fourth, revenge fantasies are comfortable. They're warm. They feel good in your brain because they suggest that if you just do something dramatic enough, you'll feel better. But the truth is, dramatic revenge usually just creates more problems. What actually feels good is taking control of your own narrative and your own future. And fifth, the best outcome isn't usually destroying the other person. The best outcome is extracting yourself from a situation where you're being hurt and building a life where that person becomes irrelevant to you. That's not forgiveness. That's not even really closure. That's just the recognition that you have agency, and you're going to use it to make your own life better. The flowers that Victoria sent me were supposed to be about power, and in a way, they were, but not the kind she intended. They were the flowers that woke me up to the fact that I'd been asleep in my own life, and I will always be grateful for that, even though I will never be grateful to her. Thank you for letting me tell this story. If it resonated with you, if you've been in a situation where someone tried to establish power over you, or you found out someone you trusted had been lying, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're currently in that position, if you're sitting with the knowledge that someone has betrayed you and you don't know what to do, I want you to know that the answer isn't always the dramatic one. Sometimes the answer is to be very quiet and very strategic and to understand that the best revenge is a life well lived. That's what the flowers taught me. See you next time.